Everyone told me my mother's marriage advice was outdated, controlling, and would suffocate my relationship. It's not the 1950s anymore. My friends laughed when I mentioned some of the rules. Modern marriages need independence, not old-fashioned submission. My best friend Cheryl was the loudest critic, rolling her eyes at my mother's ancient principles and telling me I'd be miserable if I followed them. 20 years later, those same oppressive rules are the only reason Cheryl's 18-month campaign to seduce my husband failed spectacularly, while I watched our marriage grow stronger with every manipulation she tried. Turns out the wisdom my mother learned from 52 years of marriage knew something about protecting against predators that modern advice completely misses. My name is Angela Peterson, and I'm 47 years old. I've been married to my husband David for 21 years, and for most of that time, my best friend Cheryl had been the sister I never had. We met in college, were roommates for 3 years, stood in each other's weddings, and raised our kids together. I trusted Cheryl with everything, my secrets, my struggles, my marriage problems, my life. That trust almost destroyed everything I'd built. When I got engaged to David 22 years ago, my mother sat me down the week before the wedding for what she called the talk, not about sex, but about the principles that had kept her married to my father for over 5 decades through poverty, illness, job losses, and all the storms that try to sink a marriage. Angela, I'm going to give you 15 principles that my mother gave me and her mother gave her, my mother said seriously. These rules have protected our family's marriages for generations. They're going to sound old-fashioned to you. Your friends will probably mock them, but I'm asking you to trust me and follow them anyway. I listened as my mother laid out all 15 principles, the same ones I would later pass to my own daughter. At the time, some of them seemed outdated, even offensive to my modern sensibilities. I was a college-educated woman in the early 2000s. Some of this advice sounded like it came from a different century. When I mentioned a few of the rules to my friends at my bachelorette party, Cheryl was vocal in her criticism. Your mom wants you to never complain about David to anyone? That's isolation tactics. You need to be able to vent to your friends. She says you should make your home his refuge and not hit him with problems the second he walks in? Angela, that's expecting you to be his mommy, not his partner. Showing him respect, especially in public? Girl, if he acts like a fool, you call him out. This isn't the 1950s. My other friends agreed with Cheryl. Modern marriage was about equality, independence, speaking your truth, setting boundaries. My mother's rules sounded controlling and sexist to them. But something in me, maybe intuition, maybe respect for my parents' obviously strong marriage, made me decide to follow my mother's advice anyway, even if I didn't fully understand all of it yet. I'm going to try it Mom's way, I told Cheryl. My parents have been married 52 years, and they're still in love. That's gotta count for something. Cheryl shrugged. Your choice. But don't come crying to me when you're miserable playing 1950s housewife. For the first 10 years of my marriage, I followed the principles my mother taught me, even when they went against modern advice. And honestly, my marriage was strong. David and I had our struggles, financial stress when he was between jobs, exhaustion when our kids were babies, disagreements about major decisions, but we handled them the way my mother had taught me. I never complained about David to my friends, even when Cheryl would share her marital problems and expect me to reciprocate. David and I are good, I'd say vaguely. We're working through our stuff. I made our home a peaceful place, not a place where David got ambushed with problems the second he arrived from work. I'd give him 30 minutes to decompress, then we'd talk about issues calmly. I showed David respect publicly, never mocking him or putting him down in front of others, even when other wives were bonding over complaints about their husbands. I kept our intimate life active and prioritized, even when I was tired, because my mother had taught me that physical connection kept emotional connection strong. Cheryl watched all of this with what I now realize was growing resentment. Her own marriage to her husband Marcus was struggling. She complained constantly about him, to me, to other friends, to anyone who would listen. She mocked him publicly, shared their intimate problems with her book club, and treated their home like a battlefield where she won points by being right. I don't understand how you and David never fight, Cheryl would say. It's not normal. You must be hiding problems. We disagree about things, I'd explain. We just handle it privately and work it out before it becomes a big fight. That sounds exhausting, Cheryl would reply. I'd rather just let Marcus know when he's being an idiot. By year 15 of my marriage, Cheryl's marriage to Marcus was falling apart. He'd emotionally checked out, spent more time at work than home, and barely spoke to her. They separated, then divorced, and Cheryl was bitter and angry. Men are trash, she'd say. They're all the same. They take and take until you have nothing left, then they leave. I felt terrible for my friend, but I also noticed she never took any responsibility for how she'd treated Marcus. According to Cheryl, she'd done nothing wrong. Marcus was just a typical terrible husband like all men apparently were. That's when things started to change between us. Cheryl began making comments about my marriage that felt less like friendly observation and more like jealousy. You and David are so perfect, she'd say with an edge in her voice. Must be nice to have a husband who hasn't disappointed you yet. Give it time. David's not perfect, I'd respond. We've had our challenges. We just work through them. You're too nice to him, Cheryl would say. You let him get away with too much. If you were honest, you'd admit he's probably not as great as you pretend. About 18 months after Cheryl's divorce, I started noticing changes in how she interacted with David. She began showing up at our house unannounced, always dressed nicely, makeup perfect. She'd hug David a little too long, touch his arm when she talked to him, laugh extra loud at his jokes. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. This was Cheryl, my best friend for 25 years. She'd never crossed that line. But the behavior escalated. Cheryl started texting David directly instead of going through me. Hey, can you help me hang some shelves this weekend? My car is making a weird noise. Can you take a look at it? I'm having computer problems. Are you free to come over? David would help because Cheryl was my best friend and she was going through a hard time. But he started mentioning to me that some of her behavior made him uncomfortable. Cheryl texted me at 11 p.m. last night asking if I was still awake, David said one evening. When I said yes, she asked if I wanted to come over and help remove furniture. At 11 at night, I told her I'd help on the weekend, and she seemed upset. That's when I remembered principle number 5, protect your marriage from outside interference. My mother had warned me that sometimes the biggest threats to a marriage come from people you trust. I started paying closer attention, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Cheryl was making a play for my husband. She started accidentally sending David text messages that were clearly meant to seem flirtatious. Oops, that was supposed to go to someone else, she'd say when he didn't respond the way she wanted. She would show up at our house when she knew I was at work, bringing David coffee or lunch, staying to chat, positioning herself as the friend who understood him. She started dressing provocatively when she knew David would be around, bending over unnecessarily, finding excuses to touch him. She began making comments to me designed to create distance between David and me. David seems stressed. Are you sure everything is okay with you too? He seems like he might need someone to talk to. I ran into David at the grocery store, and we had the nicest conversation. He told me things about his work that he never mentions to you. Maybe you should ask him about his projects more? Every comment was designed to make me doubt my marriage while positioning herself as the woman who understood my husband better than I did. A woman with less secure marriage might have fallen for it. I might have started questioning David, accusing him, creating the very distance Cheryl was trying to manufacture. But I remembered my mother's principles. Principle number 1, never speak badly about your husband to others, especially family. I had never given Cheryl ammunition to use against David because I'd never complained about him to her. So when she tried to tell me David was stressed or unhappy, I knew she was lying because David told me everything. We had that kind of marriage because we built it intentionally. Principle number 5, protect your marriage from outside interference. I recognized that Cheryl was trying to interfere, and I shut it down immediately. I stopped inviting her over when David was home. I stopped sharing our schedule so she couldn't accidentally show up. I created distance. Principle number 6, show him respect, especially in public. Because I'd spent 20 years building David up and never tearing him down, He felt secure and valued in our marriage. He wasn't vulnerable to someone else offering him validation because he got it from me every day. When I confronted David about Cheryl's behavior, I didn't accuse him of anything. Principle number 4, never go to bed angry, had taught us to communicate openly and trust each other. I think Cheryl is trying to come between us, I told David calmly. I've noticed her behavior changing, and I wanted to talk to you about it before making any decisions. David was relieved. Thank you for saying something. I've felt uncomfortable for months, but I didn't want to sound paranoid or cause problems between you and your best friend. But yes, Cheryl has been inappropriate. She texted me yesterday asking if I was happy in my marriage and if I ever wondered what if about other choices. That was the line. I called Cheryl and told her we needed to talk. We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory, and I was direct. Cheryl, your behavior toward my husband has become inappropriate. The texts, the visits, the comments, it needs to stop. Cheryl played innocent. I don't know what you're talking about. David and I are friends. You're being paranoid and jealous. I'm not jealous. I'm setting boundaries. You're not welcome at our house anymore when I'm not there. You need to stop texting David. And you need to stop making comments designed to create problems in my marriage. Cheryl's mask dropped. Maybe if you weren't following your mother's antiquated rules and actually treated your marriage like a modern partnership, you wouldn't be so insecure. I'm not insecure.
I'm protective.
There's a difference. And those antiquated rules are the reason my marriage is strong enough that your manipulation isn't working. Manipulation? Cheryl's laugh was bitter. Angela, wake up. David is bored with you. You're too perfect, too accommodating, too boring. He needs someone who challenges him, who excites him. Someone like me. There it was. The truth I'd been seeing, but hoping wasn't real. Cheryl, David doesn't want you. He's told me about your behavior, we've talked about it, and we're unified in setting boundaries. Whatever fantasy you've built in your head, it's not real. You're just scared because you know your perfect marriage is a lie, Cheryl shot back. You follow these stupid rules your mother taught you, playing the perfect wife, but it's all fake. No one can be that good. Eventually David is going to see through it and realize he could have someone real. I stood up to leave. I'm not fake, Cheryl. I'm intentional. Every day for 20 years I've chosen to build my marriage following principles that have worked for generations. Not because I'm weak or submissive, but because I'm smart enough to learn from wisdom that's been proven. You mocked those principles 20 years ago. You've spent your marriage ignoring them and tearing your husband down. And now you're alone and bitter, trying to destroy what I've built because you're jealous of what you don't have. I walked out of that coffee shop and never spoke to Cheryl again as a friend. She tried a few more times to contact David, drunk texts at midnight, showing up at his workplace, calling from different numbers. But David blocked her everywhere, and we presented a united front. Cheryl eventually moved to a different state. I heard through mutual friends that she'd gone through several more failed relationships, each time blaming the men for being typical, while never examining her own behavior. Meanwhile, David and I celebrated our 21st anniversary last month. Our kids are in college now, thriving. Our marriage is stronger than ever because it was built on principles that have survived generations of testing. The irony isn't lost on me. 20 years ago, Cheryl mocked my mother's marriage principles as outdated and oppressive. She pushed modern ideas about independence, speaking your truth, not coddling your husband, making sure you always put yourself first. She followed that modern advice right into a bitter divorce and multiple failed relationships. Then she tried to seduce my husband by offering him everything she thought he wasn't getting from me: excitement, challenge, a woman who didn't submit to old-fashioned rules. But David didn't want excitement at the cost of peace. He didn't want a woman who would challenge him publicly and tear him down. He didn't want someone who thought following proven principles was weakness. He wanted what we'd built together: a marriage where he felt respected, valued, desired, and secure. A home that was his refuge, not his battlefield. A wife who chose him every single day, not because she had to, but because the principles I followed made choosing him easy even on hard days. My mother's 15 principles weren't about being submissive or weak. They were about being strategic, intentional, and wise. They were about protecting something valuable by following rules that had been tested through generations and proven to work. Principle number 1, never complaining about David to others, meant Cheryl had no ammunition when she tried to convince me my marriage was troubled. I hadn't given her stories to twist. Principle number 2, keeping our intimate life active, meant David felt desired and connected to me. Cheryl couldn't offer him something he was already getting at home. Principle number 3, eating dinner together, meant David and I stayed connected daily. We knew each other's lives, struggles, and joys. Cheryl couldn't position herself as someone who understood him better. Principle number 4, never going to bed angry, meant we didn't have a backlog of resentment she could exploit. Our conflicts were resolved quickly, not left to fester. Principle number 5, protecting our marriage from outside interference, gave me the framework to recognize Cheryl's behavior as the threat it was and shut it down immediately. Principle number 6, showing David respect publicly, meant he felt valued and secure. He wasn't vulnerable to someone else offering validation because I gave it to him constantly. Every single principle worked together like armor protecting our marriage from Cheryl's 18-month campaign to destroy it. Today I'm 47 years old, and I'm teaching those same 15 principles to my daughter as she prepares for her own wedding next year. She's heard the story about Cheryl, and she understands now why these rules matter. Mom, she asked me recently, why do you think Cheryl really went after Dad? Was it really about wanting him, or was it about something else? I thought about that question carefully. I think Cheryl was angry that she'd rejected the kind of wisdom I'd followed, and her marriage failed while mine succeeded. Instead of examining her own choices, she wanted to prove that my marriage was fake, that following those principles didn't really work. If she could seduce David, it would prove she'd been right all along, that modern marriage advice was better and my mother's principles were worthless. But they weren't worthless, my daughter said. They saved your marriage. They did more than save it, I corrected. They built it strong enough that an attack from someone I'd trusted for 25 years couldn't even put a crack in it. That's the power of following proven wisdom instead of popular opinion. The hardest part of this story isn't that my best friend tried to steal my husband. It's that she tried to do it while mocking the very principles that made her attempt fail. She positioned herself as the modern, liberated woman while I was supposedly the outdated, submissive wife following ancient rules. But when everything was tested, her modern approach had left her bitter, divorced, and desperate. And my ancient approach had built a marriage strong enough to withstand sustained attack from someone who knew all my vulnerabilities and had access to my life. 20 years ago, everyone thought my mother's advice was outdated. Cheryl laughed at me for following rules that seemed to come from a different era. Modern marriage advice said I should be independent, vocal about my complaints, willing to call out my husband publicly, and prioritize my own needs above the relationship. I'm so grateful I ignored all of that and followed my mother's wisdom instead. Because when the real test came, when someone I trusted tried systematically to seduce my husband by offering everything the modern world said men wanted, those outdated principles were the only reason she failed. Turns out wisdom doesn't have an expiration date. Turns out what worked for my grandmother's marriage and my mother's marriage still works today. And turns out the best friend who mocked those principles 20 years ago proved exactly why they matter when she spent 18 months failing to break what they'd built. My mother's 15 marriage principles aren't old-fashioned. They're timeless. And the woman who called them oppressive found out the hard way that they're actually protective. So protective that even a decades-long friendship with full access to my life and marriage couldn't penetrate the armor they created. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something so strong that the people who try to destroy it only destroy themselves in the attempt. Cheryl wanted to prove my marriage was fake and my principles were worthless. Instead, she proved they were real and powerful enough to protect me from her. And that's a lesson she'll carry for the rest of her life.